Oh, yes. Oh, that's good. So, तो टेस्ट क्या लो लग रहा है दो दिन से मुझे कैसा लग रहा है वो दारू का अभी कर रहे हैं क्लास को लगा तो उधर जाएंगे तो अपना कैमरा में
Can we start with the session?
जूम कनेक्टेड है Thanks for everything. Okay, मेरा वो कर ओवर मगर माइक वगैरह कनेक्टेड होता है ऑडियो प्रॉब्लम आ गया चल नहीं रहा है ओ मेरे कैमरे अरे भैया इधर भी चल रहा है फर्स्ट टाइम यहाँ पे रोक करना थैंक यू हेलो हेलो फिलहाल है यार
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming here for this session. Right now, with us, like we have Raghav Sehgal sir. He is PhD from Yale University and also a Form 30 under 30 honoree. He is our alumnus from 2012 batch. Sorry, yeah, 2012.
That's 2012.
Yeah, sir.
मुझे भी नहीं समझ आता चले
And he'll be inside, like giving your insights on the topic of aging and sorry guys.
चले इतना काफी है बाकी मैं बता दूंगा
Okay.
Thank you. Hey everyone. My name is Raghav. PhD ये बाकी मैं आगे बताता रहूँगा. तो चलिए. So as you guys might have heard, so I got 30 under 30 recently, but my journey started here at IIIT when I did electronics and communication engineering. I was actually the first batch of electronics EC graduates. Back then, there were two programs there, CSE and EC. We built very खुला मैदान था बदलते उठते थे actually during winter there used to be a lot of fog around that area and we used to just go and sit on those logs and during my engineering, actually, I was primarily studying electronics, but also had an interest in comp bio in general. Actually, comp bio was very interest. मेरा biotech में interest था. वो high school से था मेरा. But the like this weird kid in my school who did this combination of like physics, chemistry, mathematics plus biotechnology. Biology, physics, chemistry plus mathematics plus biotechnology. And when it came to like choosing degrees and everything, and selecting this like during this program, post my boards and everything, my parents were like, research electronics कर लो computer science इसलिए नहीं बोलो मेरे माँ बाप ने मेरे dad का business actually automobile sector में था तो मैंने कहा कि electronics कर लो कि dad का business run कर लो उसके बाद that's reasonable choice है तो इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स करना शुरू कर दिया मैंने um, and and I joined electronics here. I was doing pretty well actually. With a 9.6 GPA, I was sailing through my courses, and then come I think my third year, this startup came here to do like a IIM. Rashmi ma'am है अभी भी यहाँ पर सारे प्रोफेसर चले गए पर रश्मि मैम अभी तक है आई एम वेरी सरप्राइज्ड बाय दैट पूरा but doing is I wanted to say for this startup called Genomics, I remember, and that startup was essentially in the area of pump bio और हम लोगों को इसीलिए इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स वाले को एक्चुअली बैठने नहीं दे रहे थे startup particular process में क्योंकि they only wanted the computer science kids to apply to this comp bio stuff. मैं बहुत अलर्ट करके कस्टमर से नहीं मैं बैठ गया तो पहला काम तो वही होता है जो टॉप देते हैं तब ज्ञान करते हैं तो पहले वो गिविंग का ज्ञान अभी दो चार क्वेश्चन पूछिए ज्यादा से ज्यादा ये आता था बायोटेक आता था मुझे तो बता सकता था बायोटेक और उसके बाद वो कंप्यूटर साइंस वाला टेस्ट आता है तो कंप्यूटर साइंस वाले टेस्ट में ऑफ कोर्स इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स इंजीनियर हो तो क्या एक्चुअली फॉर मी मैं उस वक्त स्टूडेंट काउंसिल में था तो अब थोड़ा ये समझाता हूँ तुम्हारे को ये अभी तक समझ नहीं आएगा पर ये जो पुरानी बिल्डिंग थी दिखती है ना तुम्हारे को वो हमारी एकेडमिक बिल्डिंग है उसके टॉप फ्लोर पे स्टूडेंट काउंसिल रूम वाज ऑन द on one side and on the other side was the was where the interviews used to happen वहाँ पे एक्चुअली प्रोफेसर जनोटे का ऑफिस होता था और बिल्कुल सामने इंटरव्यूज होते थे सारे तो मैं स्टूडेंट काउंसिल रूम से मैं स्टूडेंट काउंसिल में था उस वक्त और काउंसिल रूम से बाहर निकल रहा था और ये लोग इंटरव्यूज के लिए कुछ दोस्त मेरे वहाँ बैठे हुए थे और जो स्टार्टअप का फाउंडर था एक दो फाउंडर्स थे एक्चुअली वो बाहर ऐसे लोगों को ऐसे गैदर करने आ रहे थे और मैं अपने एक दो दोस्तों से मिलने चला गया जस्ट टू से हाय हेलो क्या चल रहा है कैसा एंड they were like चलो लोग they saw me they were like तुम इस प्रोसेस में इन्वॉल्व हो अरे नहीं मैं बस तो हाय हेलो कर रहा हूँ अरे नहीं हो अंदर गए उसके बाद रेस्टोरेंट में बाहर आती है और कहती हैं तुम प्रोसेस बैठ मुझे एक मिनट को लगा ये सारे आईआईटी वाले थे जितने फाउंडर्स थे और मैं सबसे ज्यादा क्या शुरू कराया था जैसे आ जाएगा ना जैसे ही उसमें क्या शुरू कराया था और बाकी सारे कंप्यूटर साइंस वाले ना तुम लोग हार हो जाते हो मतलब लेक्चर्स में और अगर कोई ढंग से तैयार होकर आ जाता है तो मुझे लगा था कि चलिए मेरा ही बता दूंगा मैं किसी काम कुछ मेरे को एक में बैठा दिया राइट आईटी वाले काम की तो लाइक ठीक है तो मैं बहुत चिल मारकर अपना इंटरव्यू दूंगा मैं कोई नहीं जब इंटरव्यू लेने लगे they asked me some genuinely good questions about biotech and I was like okay whatever I'll answer them पूछा कि क्या कर रहे क्यों बायोटेक बनना चाह रहे हो एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट क्यों इंटरेस्ट है तुम्हारा एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट क्या पढ़ रहे हो तुमने कुछ पढ़ा है बायोटेक में बता दिया मैंने बताया मैं किताबें भी पढ़ता हूँ पार्ट टाइम एक दो बार बोल भी दिया साथ में कर देंगे किताबें भी पढ़ी हुई है मैंने ऑल दैट स्टफ they were impressed by that पहला राउंड हो गया जितने भी अच्छे बच्चे थे सारे छट गए सिवाय मेरे और एक और दो और बच्चे थे ये हो गया सेकंड राउंड हुआ एक और बच्चा चढ़ गया सिर्फ मैं और एक और बहुत बढ़िया लड़की बच गए he got selected. Turns out I got to know much later that the reason that they selected me for that internship was because I was very proactively asking questions during that first round when there was like presenting. Not because I had any knowledge, not because I was a good computer scientist. And I asked them, why did you actually select me? I was not good at computer science. And they were like, well, it's fine. We can teach you how to do programming, teach you how to code. That's not a unique skill to have. And for what it's worth, I don't want to break your lens of the world right now. All of you would be very much replaceable at this point for something like GitHub Copilot. I'm not kidding about it. Like anyone out there can use ChatGPT and code equally, if not better than you, right? So what your unique perspective would be your passion for the science, right? And your passion for that particular field that you're working on doing research in, right? Your context for it, right? And I'm telling this to you why, because a lot of my presentation is today going to be about how I'm using my context, right? And using coding in that particular context. But going back to that story, the reason they selected me was because I was really passionate about biotech in general. Not because I was good at coding, really good at biology. I was really passionate about it. And they said, we cannot teach that. We cannot teach that to someone. Right? So be passionate about the science that you're doing, first and foremost. Right? Having said that, I got into this internship, and internship day we took part in this thing called, how many of you have heard about Synapse? Synapse, combined people, right? Synapse, yeah. So Synapse is this kind of place where there is a lot of data shared, and they have these dream challenges, there are computational challenges where you can take part, right, from all across the globe, right? We took part in one of these challenges, and we came second worldwide. This challenge called the prostate cancer dream challenge. But we came second worldwide, and I wasn't a great coder. I was taught everything on the job, things like that internship. But that kind of gave me a taste of the fact that maybe I just need to be really passionate about this field and the rest will kind of come along, right? Unfortunately for me, वो started हो गया मेरी internship के बाद, उसका नाम था जीवोनिक्स. तो कोई नहीं, थर्ड ईयर आया, थर्ड ईयर का खत्म हो गया समर इंटर्नशिप, फोर्थ ईयर में शुरू हो गया, फोर्थ ईयर के शुरू में हम सबकी जॉब लग जाती है, मेरी लग गई. With this sort of being challenged in my belt, I was like, तो 2016 का टाइम था ये, 2015 का टाइम था, data science was all the rage, so it made sense to get a job for a data scientist. So we applied for the data science jobs, लाखों में एक ही jobs होता है, so we got one at actually उसको कर दो तीन एक एक्स्ट्रा करके कंपनी आती है उसमें, and दोनों मतलब pretty decent. Actually was by a company, and I think it was very satisfied, and from a middle class family, my parents were also very satisfied. Turns out my boss from that startup started a new company called Alumni, and he मेरी fourth year में ही शुरू करी उसने company after I got in my job. He was like, देख मैंने नई कंपनी शुरू करी है, तेरा मूड है तो हफ्ते में एक दो दिन काम करने आता है. आखिरी साल का जॉब मिल गई थी, उससे कुछ बचे नहीं थे करने को, पढ़ने को तो चले जाता हूँ, शाहपुर जाके कंपनी थी, ऑटो लेकर जाता था मैं यहाँ से, वापस आ जाता था शाम को, ऑटो में रह रहा था मैं, बहुत चला लाइफ थी. और हाँ, plus I used to get paid also, like I used to get paid like back in the day, $10,000, 10,000 rupees a month for working 2 days a week is not bad. It's a good extra pocket money. So I'm pretty happy about that. And as it turns out, at the end of my 4th year, I decided to take this job, which Ashwin did not know. But I had a very interesting story. Actually, Rashmi ma'am but especially case one. So, placement committee mein, you get this really interesting thing if you're in the placement committee. You can make any one company as your dream company. I don't know अभी भी होता है कि नहीं, but हमारे टाइम पे होता है। एक कंपनी को तुम अपनी ड्रीम कंपनी बना सकते हो जिसका भी मतलब है, राइट? और उसको अगर तुमने अपनी ड्रीम कंपनी बना ली, राइट, तो तुम उस कंपनी में बैठ सकते हो और उसकी जॉब ले सकते हो, एंड यू कैन लीव ऑल अदर जॉब्स, राइट? तो मैंने कहा मैं दूसरे को अपनी ड्रीम कंपनी बना। Or by the way, Elucidator was paying me lesser than Axia was paying me, and this one was paying me because कुछ खाई नहीं उसका अपने पास। So overall, like, it was a really bad choice for me personally, but I was like, yeah, it's a good bet to play on at this point. And Rational did allow for it. So actually, Elucidator, the CTO House company, they did like a full fake interview, and like all of them came here to do like a fake interview. They even had two interns. Don't know what that interns say, but in that process, they also hired me. And there was like a whole fake process of hiring me from IIIT and marking them as my dream company. So that's how I got hired into Elucidator, and I spent about 4 years at that company as first data scientist and then leading their product development. The company is now valued at about $120 million. And what they do is essentially they aggregate publicly available biological data, clean it up, and then sell it to pharmaceutical companies to do machine learning. They of course do their own machine learning. The whole idea is to do target discovery, target validation, all things in the realm of drug discovery, right? Uh, Around 2019, end of 2019, I decided I'm kind of done with this space. Also because I was now canonically trained to be a computational biologist, and which is why I decided to jump ship and leave for Yale. And get a bit of training in actually doing computational biology. Well, only a certain point in time I can push it people and say that I know biology without actually knowing biology. So that's when I decided I need to go study biology for a bit. And that's when I went to Yale. I did a postgrad for about half a year or so at the doctorate. Who's like a big guy in the field of sort of metabolomic aging and sort of diabetes and stuff like that. And then I eventually joined Dr. Morgan Levine's lab. Dr. Morgan Levine is kind of like, if you Google her, she's one of the biggest people in context of aging. She actually changed my perspective on aging itself, because I always thought I'd be doing sort of cancer drug discovery and stuff like that, building computational pipelines for it. But I attended this random talk of hers back in the day when I was a young grad student. I said, I was saying, you know what, I go, PhD, I understand this. So we were invited, तो हमारे को talks पे जाने के लिए ना हमारे को the way they used to lure us was कि they provide food for us, right? PhD से related. And so one of my friends was like, इस वाले टॉक में अच्छा खाना मिलता है, इस वाले सेशन में अच्छा खाना मिलता है, क्योंकि हर डिपार्टमेंट की अपनी टॉक्स होती है और कुछ डिपार्टमेंट बहुत कंफ्यूज होते हैं और कुछ डिपार्टमेंट बहुत बढ़िया होते हैं। तो उस डिपार्टमेंट टेक्नोलॉजी डिपार्टमेंट की टॉक्स में जनरली खाना अच्छा मिलता था। तो actually we had a curated group of like इस डिपार्टमेंट की टॉक्स में जाना चाहिए और इन जाना चाहिए। But anyway, so this particular he was like चलते हैं, and I went along with him, and मेरा मन तो था नहीं कुछ ज़्यादा सुनने का, तो मैं अपना लैपटॉप पे काम कर रहा था while Morgan was giving the talk. But turns out the talk was really interesting, and something that she said during that talk really stuck with me, which was if you're planning to solve all of these diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, all these aging related diseases, why don't you just solve the root cause of that, which is aging? Right? We're all thinking of aging as this kind of phenomenon, right? Which is kind of very natural to us. All of us will age, right? But why not think of it almost as a disease? Right? Think of it as something that should not be happening. Right? Which is not to say aged people are diseases. That's a bad concept. I'm saying that aging is a disease that needs to be. Right? And that kind of changed my perspective on biology altogether. Okay? And that helped me think about sort of aging as a field and helped me get into this field. And I worked with Morgan. And one of the first things I built in the field was this biomarker called systems age. Right? What systems age does is from a single blood draw, quantifies aging in 11 different organs of your body. Right? It's really powerful because this has the potential of replacing your clinical chemistry biomarker. So तुम लोग जाते होगे शायद मेटाबॉलिक पैनल करवाते होगे लिवर पैनल करवाते होगे ये सब पूरे होंगे ना तुम्हें बहुत सारे 100 बार जैब्स करवाते होगे अपने right imagine instead of doing that you can do a single blood draw a single trick of the hand right and get uh, the aging of all of your different organs right which is sort of predictive of diseases in your body right that's really powerful and that is what I did. And I'll talk about that in a bit of detail, but that's a very computational thing, by the way. Right? It's not biological. मैं कोई wet lab experiments नहीं करता. मैं कुछ भी उनमें काम नहीं करता. I actually patented this and then licensed it out to a biomarker provider called True Diagnostics, which I actually serve as the scientific advisory board member as well. And since then, I've actually become the principal at a venture capital fund called Longevity Tech Fund, as well as director at this longevity clinic called Healthy Longevity Clinic. I also sort of do some of my own advisory and angel investments in different in the longevity space. So, because of all of this very long journey is why that happened, right? But ये सब तो मैंने बहुत सारा ज्ञान बता दिया. Let me actually talk about why this talk is, right? About genoscience, about longevity, right? So we know that longevity medicine or genoscience is really cool, but let me actually tell you why it's really cool, at least from a media perspective. It's making a lot of headlines, right? NPR. Does anyone know what NPR is here? Right? So NPR, US news sources are very shitty, right? All of them are biased, right? NPR is the only one we believe is not. And she's the one that's by the government agents, by the US government, but God knows after the government. But NPR covered this trial called the King trial, which will potentially be looking at one of a very common drug, and I'll talk about it, called metformin, that's given for diabetes, and has been given for diabetes for a very long time. That might actually slow down aging. We'll talk about it in a second. How many of you know this person? Who's this person? Yeah. बताएं नाम क्या है इसका? So season 4 episode finale, right? She actually measured the biological age. I'm not showing you. She actually measured my biomarker. And funny thing, Chloe came out to be the youngest, which I did not expect. And how many of you know this guy? Right? This is up and then this guy, right, who's trying to stay young forever, right? So actually, let's talk about this guy for a minute, right? So, for this guy, Brian Johnson, right, who's investing millions of dollars, right? For him, if you think about from his perspective and for his viewers and his listeners, you might actually believe that sort of genoscience and longevity medicine might be a soft problem. So let's hypothetically take this guy called Jairon Bonson, no relationship to Brian Johnson at all, right? He goes to a longevity clinic, he gets his clinical biomarkers measured to quantify aging, and then based on biomarkers, results, clinicians suggest certain specific interventions. A few months later, clinicians again assess JB's biomarkers to see intervention's impact, and then JB leaves the clinic feeling like a 18-year-old. Now, this is what sort of a majority of people believe how sort of Brian Johnson's or JB's or like Giant and Watson's sort of blueprint system works, right? But if this was the case, all of us sitting here would be practicing longevity medicine or preventative medicine, right? It is not as simple as this. Each of these steps actually have a lot of challenges. So, for example, measuring biomarkers to quantify aging, we first need sort of insightful aging biomarkers, right? Something that just doesn't tell us like how old you are, how young you are, something more than that. Second, you need germ protectors or medicines that actually make you younger. You don't know which medicines actually make you younger, right? Help you extend lifespan or health span. And then third, we need biomarkers that actually respond to these interventions, right? अगर तुम्हारा biomarker is just telling you कि तुम 10 साल लंबे जियोगे, right? But ये नहीं change नहीं करता with age, right? With your intervention, right? It doesn't go down. There's no use of this biomarker altogether, right? So we need all of these three different categories for these things to work. But let's actually first talk about why we need aging biomarkers in the first place. Not just from a clinical perspective, but from a clinical trial perspective, right? So, you know what this number is? Arey, हाँ यार, shocking, right? 67. What does the number 67 represent? It's the average life expectancy of an Indian, right? I believe a lot of we can live till 150, right? पता नहीं दिल्ली के pollution में it's debatable. बोलते ही खाती है कोई. But I imagine all the things you could do till the age of 150. I really like cooking. मैं बहुत खतरनाक butter chicken pasta बनाता हूँ. That's posted upstairs. I have a lot of friends I like to hang out with. My friends there, and I also I kind of miss my grandmother. That's my grandmother, and that's me in that picture there. She didn't live really long. She passed away at the age of 62. Imagine the fact that if she lived longer, how much time I could have spent with her, right? I wish you guys can spend that time with your loved ones, with your future generation. Right? But to do all of that, I need to somehow provide you guys with 150 years, right? But how is that going to be possible? It's going to be possible through what we just talked about, longevity medicine, right? But there's a problem with longevity medicine. There's an example here of metformin, which we were just talking about, right? Metformin is a very good medication, which we think could be a longevity medication. In retrospective trials, in retrospective studies, so studies have already been run, right? It has been shown that in healthy people, it can extend lifespan up to 10 years, right? Which is really exciting. It can also decrease cardiovascular disease events. It has shown to decrease sort of chances of getting Alzheimer's, as well as chronic kidney disease, right? So it has multiple effects, right? But we can't actually run a clinical trial on it right now. That's the biggest problem. You know why? Because the cost of running a clinical trial like this, or the time to run a clinical trial like this would be 20 plus years. क्योंकि clinical trial को run करने के लिए, essentially you have to give this medication to someone who's about 60, 65 years of age and track them till they effectively die, right? So that is, mortality is the end outcome of a trial like this, right? So you're tracking someone for about 20 years, right? Any clinical trial right now runs for what, 5 years, 7 years at max, right? How is a 20-year clinical trial going to be done, right? And the cost of this clinical trial is going to be as strong as $50 billion. No one's going to invest in it. No pharma company, no country can invest in a clinical trial like this, right? So what if there was a way to decrease the time to less than 5 years? Maybe even down to 2 years and less than $2 million. The way to do that is through aging biomarkers, right? Because what aging biomarkers essentially allow you to do is since they're prognostic, since they can predict how a person is going to age, right? They can be used as proxies, right? Proxies of, देखो, is is this particular intervention working or not, right? And so that's why these aging biomarkers are really powerful for clinical trials. So let's talk about these insightful aging biomarkers. So let's actually talk about sort of this concept of biological aging tests that we have been talking about, these aging biomarkers and so on. So you can have all of these clinical biomarkers, right? Like all of your AG, ALT, AST, all of these things, right? Your proteomic biomarker, proteome सबको पता है क्या होता है? Proteins, right? Phenome is like phenomics, which is like MRI, brain MRI, stuff like that. And these different types of omic data, these are called different types of omic data, they can be used to predict aging phenotypes. Right? Aging phenotypes क्या होते हैं? मतलब when are you going to die, for example, just mortality, right? And simply, this is what we call a biological aging test or a biological clock, right? An omic data that used to predict some kind of an omic, some kind of a aging phenotype. As simple as that, right? One of the most popular sort of aging biomarkers that's out there is called DNA methylation, right? DNA methylation biomarker, also known as epigenetic clocks. DNA methylation क्या होता है? Let's understand that for a second, right? If genes or genome is the code of life, right? Think about DNA methylation like the operating system, right? I think that's the best example I can give to the scientists. How does a heart cell know to be different from a brain cell, right? They have the same genes, right? But how does a heart cell know that it has to pump, while a brain cell know it has to store information, right? How does it know it has to be a neuron? How does that difference happen? That's through DNA methylation, right? That is what DNA methylation does, okay? But over time, what happens is that this recipe, this code, right, this operating system fades away, right? Just like a recipe, right? Over time, it fades away. Right? This operating system, this DNA methylation mark on our genome also fade away. So the cells become less and less sort of good at making or being sure about themselves, right? And this is something we can quantify, right? We can measure very proactively. And we know that sort of changes in DNA methylation are correlated with age for a very long time. This is a very simple example. So at the x-axis, you're seeing like age, on the y-axis, you're seeing like percent methylation, right? और ये colon से है, colon पता है सबको क्या होता है, right? The last step of your digestive system, right? You can see that as this person is aging, you can see it's kind of like increasing, the methylation is increasing, right? On the left hand side, you can also see kind of the marks of the methylation pattern. But in 2011 is when kind of the first predictor was made, just using sort of two simple CpG sites. We call them CpG sites or methylation sites, right? But now what these epigenetic clocks do are essentially they're a little more complex, right? They sort of use hundreds, thousands of these methylation sites, sometimes even tens of thousands of these methylation sites, combine them using some kind of machine learning model. Initially, they used to be simple linear predictors. Now they are more complex. Keeps evolving now. The latest ones are GPD based to predict some health outcome. Right? That health outcome could be anything. That could be mortality. Right? That could be mortality, morbidity, and death. Right? It could be something like even CVD occurrence, cardiovascular disease occurrence. Right? Could be anything of the sorts. Right? And these are what essentially these epigenetic clocks are at the end of the day. Now, what we have built initially over the last few years are these whole body aging clocks. Right? What they tell us is something very exciting. From a single blood draw, they can tell you whether you're 5 years older or 3 years younger, for example. Right? They all don't tell you to or really numbers बताते हैं, but just that whether you're 5 years older or 3 years younger. just on that spectrum, right? That's insightful for a clinician, but not super insightful. Like, what will a clinician really do with that? उसको पता चल गया कि तुम 5 साल बड़े हो, then what you're supposed to do? तो क्या? Right? वो माइंड क्या दवाई दे उसके बारे में, right? उसको सॉल्व करने के लिए my mentor and I, Dr. Mohammed Levine, built sort of system thing, right? Which is kind of this more insightful version of an organ clock. Complex है यहाँ पे, some TLDR में समझा रहा हूँ मैं, right? So essentially, we're predicting sort of these organ-specific biomarkers. Okay, so हर organ के specific biomarkers होते हैं, right? Which we can predict, right? And that's what we're doing. And we can effectively build organ-specific clocks that way. ये बहुत complicated है, ये मैं नहीं समझा रहा हूँ। तुमको चौंकेगा कि एक बार में ये मैं generally conference में समझाता हूँ। But यहाँ पे ये इसलिए दिखा रहा हूँ क्योंकि it's a very complicated machine learning paradigm, right? That's what I wanted to show you before. But what this essentially allows you to do, let me know if you want but what I really wanted to show you here was now you can essentially go as far as saying that the reason you're 5 years older from this single blood draw is because probably your heart is 11 years older, right? Or your lungs are 7 years older than you. Now this is a lot more insightful for a clinician, right? Because now clinician can actually say that, oh, the heart is 11 years older, maybe I should give you certain interventions that are specific to your heart, right? But your kidneys are relatively younger, they're 7 years younger. Maybe I don't really need to care about that, right? That's a lot more insightful than just knowing that you're 5 years older than you're supposed to be. So we have extensively validated this in like a lot of sample individuals, and we have actually shown that these are very specific, right? For example, the cognitive score is actually associated with brain aging, right? Or the physical function score is associated with musculoskeletal decline, so on and so forth. ऐसे lung cancer में lung, leukemia में blood, और coronary heart disease में heart, ऐसे हमने करीबन 15 different aging phenotypes के लिए दिखाया. But this is something I wanted to share with you guys, which is really interesting. जो मुझे personally बहुत excited. So till now, we had known that generally Indians age faster than other populations, at least based on epigenetics, right? But we did have an understanding of which organs were aging faster, which organs were aging slower. For the first time, we are actually able to understand that, right? Well, we had some indication हमारी cardiovascular disease होती है and all of that, but not from an epigenetic perspective, right? So you can see this here very beautifully. We have these, this is a cohort of about 7,000 individuals that was studied in Singapore, right? There are about 2,000 Chinese, 3,000 Chinese individuals, 2,000 Indians, about 1,000 Malay, and the remaining are mixed. And what you can see here is that the Indians are really accelerated in their heart score. They have higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease. You also have higher risk of sort of brain-related diseases as opposed to these populations. Also higher risk of developing musculoskeletal disorders. But interestingly, compared to sort of the Chinese population, our immune scores are actually really good, which is really interesting in my opinion. And some of these sort of differences in ethnic groups also match with sort of the triglyceride levels we have seen and sort of the CRP levels that we have seen. Right? So it makes absolute sense as to what we are really seeing in these epigenetic processes. Why is this important? It's important, Mario, many health is governed by these metrics. तुम्हारे को heart attack, मेरे को heart attack, इन्हीं reasons से आता है. But anyway, these system scores have been shown to be better than sort of some of the clocks that have been out there, which is why this thing got licensed out. Better and as I said, it's got available to clinicians and patients at any age by this company called diagnostics. But there's one question: can we go deeper? Can we go deeper than this? So this was something that I recently came up with called CPGPT, which is kind of the next generation of epigenetic clocks that's out there. So CPGPT is a versatile architecture, right? which essentially uses about 100,000 DNA methylation samples from publicly available data to predict aging of humans. You can do a bunch of things, right? Like missing data identification, edit conversion, yada, yada, yada. But the most interesting thing is that from whole blood DNA methylation, it can predict levels of plasma proteins and metabolites. Maniki, it can predict from just a single blood draw all of these different proteins and metabolites like albumin, cholesterol.
Marker single base pair.
This is a whole sort of array of
You're using the whole array.
yes, that's it.
Multi.
Exactly. And so
What was the correlation?
the correlation is like 0.97. Like that. And
Is this cellular DNA or cell?
this is cell. There is whole blood DNA methylation.
Blood?
The whole blood DNA. And these epigenetic proxies of proteins and metabolites are better than some of the biomarkers that are out there. So what this can really allow us to do is go a lot deeper now. From a single blood draw, you can go as far as saying the reason you're 5 years older is because your heart and lung is aging faster. And your heart and lung is aging faster because your cholesterol is really high, your homocysteine is really high, and troponin is really high. These are all markers of heart aging. All from a single draw of blood. You don't need multiple blood draws, you don't have to do multiple tests. Any of that. Sounds a little bit of cell like Theranos. How many of you have seen that documentary? Seen that? Yeah, seen it? Yeah. Sounds a little bit like Theranos. This is going to get published in Nature Agent, so don't worry about it. But anyway, so the question is like, which of these are actually going to be valuable, right? Because we don't want them to just like be predictive of all of these things. We want them to be responsive to sort of interventions. We also want them to be reliable changes. And so we built this framework called Translate, which can look at hundreds of biomarkers, maybe even now looking at thousands actually. And we're looking at their prognostic nature, their responsive nature, and reliable nature. Results on this are hopefully coming out. As I want to talk briefly about this second challenge, which is effective geroprotective infections, right? The challenge here is that we have a lot of clinical trials that are being run right now that are in this space of finding new biomarker, new sort of new drugs that are potentially slowing down aging. But the problem is that they're all measuring different biomarkers. You can't really compare to head-to-head comparisons. Right? You can see those black gaps. They're all the biomarkers that were not measured. By the way, all of these can be calculated from the same DNA methylation array. सबको समझता है DNA methylation array क्या होता है? इसको नहीं समझता है. Okay. बहुत सिंपल चीज है. तो एक बार तुमने ब्लड ड्रॉ करा और उसमें से एक DNA methylation array निकाला, right? तो एक बार एक एनालिसिस किया. Something like, does everyone know what transcriptomics is? Transcriptomics. Okay. थोड़ा समझाना पड़ेगा. तो उल्टा एग्जाम्पल, ठीक है? तुम लोग अगर कोलेस्ट्रॉल का टेस्ट करवाते हो, राइट? तो उसमें सिर्फ कोलेस्ट्रॉल निकलता है, राइट? बट व्हाट इफ अगर हम कहें कि हम एक टेस्ट ऐसा करेंगे जिसमें सारे प्रोटीन्स निकल आए, सारे मेटाबोलाइट्स निकल आए, बट फिर हम उसमें जब हमारी कोलेस्ट्रॉल का डेटा देखा होगा हम सिर्फ कोलेस्ट्रॉल का डेटा समझेंगे, राइट? सीपीजी एरे एग्जैक्टली यही होता है. सीपीजी एरे में करीबन 1 मिलियन सीपीजी साइट्स निकलती हैं. Right? So one blood draw gives you 1 million CPG sites, right? We only use a fraction of them to predict these biomarkers. So in future, when we make a new algorithm with the remaining CPG sites, we can always update, right? So today I took your blood, right? And I predicted your ages based on one algorithm. Tomorrow I make a new algorithm, right? To predict, say, cholesterol level, or to predict, say, I don't know, cortisol levels in the body, right? From the same this thing, I don't need to do another blood draw. I can use the same array to do it, right? That's one of the powers of using DNA methylation data, right? I don't need to repeatedly keep on generating new and new data, right? Of course, if I need to sample you again, right, to see this is other people, right? I will have to do another blood draw, and I'm looking at certain people here. But but the point is, it doesn't require, right, multiple blood draws, right, to be done. And it doesn't. Once you get that data, there's a lot of data that's generated. So the point here I'm trying to make is that all of these biomarkers are calculated from the same array. So hypothetically, these clinical trials could have calculated all of these biomarkers. They just didn't. They chose not to. It's kind of stupid, in my opinion. When you can, you should. Right? There's of course a multiple testing issue which should be solved, right? But they could have. And the reason they did not, right, leads us to the problem that now we cannot compare these interventions. Right? For example, you need a base algorithm, right? One of the biomarkers, which is very popular. But even though it's very popular, it's not being used across the board, and now we don't know which of these interventions are actually working. Right? तो हमने क्या किया? हमने सारे calculated 110 biomarkers across 51 different longevity interventions. Right? So we curated a public data set, curated like these interventional trials from public data sets, right? And calculated about 110 biomarkers. So these are lifestyle based, pharmacological, as well as supplements, as well as sort of medical procedures. Some of them come in a bit, but you can see them on the right. You can see at the top there are a lot of sort of diets there, and then in the middle you can see some pharmacological ones, even like metformin, semaglutide, rapamycin, all are there. You can see a lot of supplements there, as well as some medical procedures too. So very diverse cohort overall, right? And each little box that you're seeing here is like telling you chemo intervention kitna decrease kar raha hai at biological age, right? So it's a simple t-test. T-test आपको पता है? तुमने hopefully stats की class ली है. लिया सबने stats की class, right? एक t-test भी नहीं पता नहीं लिया अभी. First year में हो? तो t-test तुम्हारे को at least ये बताता है कि what's the difference between two means? कितना significant difference है between two groups, right? That's at the very simple level, right? तो दो groups के बीच में कितना difference है? और यहाँ पे दो groups क्या है? Before treatment and after treatment, right? For that biomarker. Number, right? Okay. So the real challenge is actually curating this data like from publicly available sources, generating all of this pipeline to create, and it's a huge actually natural language processing problem to curate all of this data, synthesize all of this metadata in a standardized format, which is what we did. But let's just narrow our focus on some commonly used biomarkers. But जब हम commonly used biomarkers को plot करते हैं उनके effect sizes के साथ, right? ये थोड़ा complex plot लग रहा है. तो हर dot जो दिख रहा है ना हमारे को छोटा-छोटा, वो हर clock का effect size है. Effect size क्या होता है? माने कि जो mean difference है before and after an intervention, right? So what you can really see is the majority of the interventions on the left hand side are the ones that are decreasing epigenetic age. But they are good for aging. Right? They are slowing down age. Sorry, they are slowing down aging. On the right are the ones that are decreasing epigenetic age. Right? And then the ones which are sort of red asterisk calling, those are the ones which are significant. Right? Significantly decreasing. You can see there are a bunch of them that are decreasing epigenetic age, which is really cool in my opinion. Right? Something like metformin shows up as second, right? So like, there's also something I wanted to share here was, if you look at something like longevity interventions, all of them together, they all decrease epigenetic age. Controls जो मतलब regular हैं, कोई change नहीं हो रहा है, they remain kind of standard. While aging events like, for example, getting COVID, right? Getting cancer, right? Getting diabetes, all increase epigenetically. Okay, so you can see this really nice trend. And then we can also group these interventions, right? And see which of them actually have the largest effect, right? So lifestyle interventions seem to have a decent effect. Pharmacological have the most effect, while supplements and medical procedures seem to decrease age, but not quite, right? But what's really cool is we can also go down back to the organ level, right? तो ये कुछ whole body clocks हैं जो मैंने list करी हुई हैं सब में कुछ decrease हो रहा है, right? So these are the ones that are not significant, right? For these three interventions, intramuscular plasma concentrate is a very interesting intervention. बच्चों की umbilical cord से extract करके blood, put it into intramuscularly into old people. Cool, right? Sounds very. How many of you have seen Silicon Valley? No? Blood Boy, yeah, kind of like that. Kind of like Blood Boy, but imagine now umbilical cord. Metformin, we just talked about, right? The diabetes pill, and hyperbaric oxygen therapy is this where you like put yourself in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber and you essentially breathe in a low pressure, high oxygen environment. Okay. What you see is something really interesting, because even though all of these were showing like decrease in age, what you see is something really interesting. Intramuscular plasma concentrate leads to only decrease in musculoskeletal aging. Sense if you intramuscularly apply one. But actually hormone aging must be of say. Probably because to make pregnant system say, a non-pregnant system में डाल रहे हो, which might actually increase epigenetic age. Right? Metformin actually has a multi-system effect, right? Hyperbaric oxygen therapy only helps with lungs. Okay, so they don't, different therapies have effects on different organs. They don't work for everyone, right? And what this actually may allow us to do is potentially match intervention. So पहले हमने अभी देखा था कि कौन से biomarkers will increase epigenetic age, right? So which for an individual, which organs can be potentially increased? And so we can measure those biomarkers, and based on that, you can essentially tell people which interventions they should take, right? To slow down aging, right? It's essentially a form of precision longevity medicine, right? And the whole idea here is that medicine has been practiced for a very long time, right? Neuroscience is really cool, like medicine is really cool in that sense. But now what we are trying to do is instead of having reactive medicine, right? कि तुम्हारी को बीमारी हुई, उसके बाद हम तुम्हारी को दवाई देंगे. तो बीमारी होने से पहले ही दवाई देंगे, right? So that बीमारी ही ना हो, right? So a really good example of this मैं देना चाह रहा हूँ might be actually Ozempic. How many of you have heard about Ozempic? Right? Ozempic के बारे में पता है? लेकिन देखा बहुत सारे सेलिब्रिटीज सभी बहुत पतले हो गए. करण जोहर को देखा है सिगड़ा सा हो गया है, right? बहुत सारे सेलिब्रिटीज बहुत पतले हो गए हैं, right? In fact, this नहीं वो बफर फैट सर्जरी नहीं है, उसका पता नहीं, मेरे को तो पता है Ozempic से हुआ है. अच्छा बफर फैट भी करवाया होगा. चल देखो करण जोहर की बात. But I don't know. The point is that Ozempic is one medication that is used to slow down or decrease obesity in your body, right? Now, if you think about this for a second, what does obesity lead to? Obesity leads to cardiovascular disease, it leads to diabetes, a bunch of this different aging-related disorders, right? Now, if we were to slow down obesity, right, or decrease obesity in the body, you will essentially prevent all of these diseases from occurring, right? So, if this person was to get their first cardiovascular disease event at the age of 45 or say 55, who was obese, will now have their first cardiovascular disease event at the age of 70. If they were to get their diabetes at the age of 45, they will now have at the age of 60. So, in some way, by preventing obesity, what you're doing is you are preventing the occurrence of an aging related disease. So for at least for obese people, you can think about semaglutide or Ozempic as it's commonly known as an anti-aging therapeutic. You're giving it preemptively to prevent all of these diseases from happening. Side effect is also pretty, well, if you see the things here as certain philosophy of that, but that set aside, it is an anti-aging therapeutic, right? You had a question. Okay, cool. But the point is that all of these, Ozempic is a great example of an anti-aging therapeutic in my opinion, right? But we also want to predict new ones, right? Can we predict new therapies? So this is what a typical drug discovery pipeline looks like. I'm all over time now. So we screen compounds in cell lines, we filter them in sort of model organisms, and then we finally sort of run clinical trials. But can we replicate this in silico? Right? That is the question. And so, can we screen compounds using single cell GPT models, sort of build sort of predictors of lifespans of C. elegans, and sort of even predictors for CLE in mice, and then run clinical trials based on synthetic data in humans. So actually, this is very similar to what sort of Gaurav has worked on, but probably a different dimension. So an early example of this may work is, so we combined about C. elegans lifespan extension data from about 2,000 plus compounds, derived their chemical and biological signatures, performed dimensionality reduction using an autoencoder, and visualized these compounds in the latent space using lifespan extension. This is what all of those compounds look like, about 2,000 plus of them. These are what they look like when you're looking at just the 20% or less, greater than 20% life extension, less than 20% life extension. These are all compounds that essentially extend lifespan or decrease lifespan of worms. Okay, why is that helpful? Because these are model organisms can actually extend it all the way to humans, right? And being able to predict to what extent, right, they're extending lifespan or decreasing lifespan, right? Not just the binary fact of like, are they increasing or decreasing? Are they geroprotectors or not geroprotectors? But actually predicting the extent, right, can be really powerful for us. Right? And that is something that I'm working on right now. So what we need to do is sort of work on all of these things, of course, in the academic setting, but also translate them in practice. So that is the work that I do at the Healthy Longevity Clinic. Going through this quickly. So we ran a retrospective study of one individual. So we do like kind of these individual by individual, n equal to 1 trial, right? And I want to show data for this one individual. On the radial axis, what you're seeing here are those organ ages that I was talking about, right? Calculated. And what we are seeing here is essentially those organ ages for this one person decrease. As you can see, it goes from -15 to +15 years, right? So there's chronological age person, the chronological age of the number of birthdays, candles on your last birthday is about 51 years for this one person, right? They have a history of autoimmune disorders like arthritis, which might explain their increased immune aging and musculoskeletal aging. They have about BMI of 31, which might explain their increased metabolic aging, and they also have substance use behaviors such as smoking, which might explain their increased lung aging. They were given 3 interventions, very common ones: smoking cessation, intermittent fasting, and metformin, all of which you can see here. The smoke cessation would, of course, slow down lung aging. Calorie restriction would slow down, of course, metabolic aging, and then musculoskeletal aging, and metformin has a multi-system effect. 1 year later, they had very strong medication adherence to all of these. They continued smoking cigars, but quit smoking cigarettes. They lost about 9.5 kg in this process, and they had qualitatively less arthritic pain. What you can see here is their immune aging has gone down significantly, which matches with their phenotype data. They also had a significant decrease in their metabolic aging, again matching with the decreased weight loss, as well as decreased musculoskeletal aging, again matching with their phenotype. Their lung aging kind of remains consistent, which we kind of expect given their smoking of cigars. And interestingly, we see a multi-system effect, which is explainable by taking metformin, which has a multi-system effect. So overall, we can sort of use these biomarkers that we have developed using these novel artificial intelligence based, these you like to call them approaches in practice, in clinics, and transform the healthcare altogether. Now, of course, there are many challenges that exist in this space, and we are working on solving them. I didn't talk much about responsiveness today, we didn't have time. But there's also sort of a lot of iterations being done to sort of get them to the next level, like CDTV, building sort of these predictors for geroprotective intervention and finding responsive aging biomarkers. And eventually, we are also working on already bringing some of these interventions and methodologies to clinics around the world. With that, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, sir. And I would like to request our Professor Dr. Tarini sir to present a goodie hamper to the sir.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay. Any questions, guys? Feel free to ask. Also,
Okay, so what, have you ever looked at selfie data?
I don't look at selfie data.
No,
No, I don't personally. I mean, there's a lot of work that's already been done. There is some of it from like Chinese cohorts, but I personally don't look at selfie data.
how is it go? What they like ourselves. Blood cell,
I think to me the explanation is very simple. I think there needs to be more studies to be done on this explanation, but I think about it from this perspective. Blood is this one organ that has a memory on the right? And so there is a flow of information, right, from all of these different organs. But the flow of information happens through molecules, right? That these molecules are essentially modifying the methylome of the blood itself, right? And the point is that we are even more sure about this is because we are able to now predict not just the organ aging, but actually predict sort of these plasma proteins, right? These plasma metabolite, which makes me even more sure that these plasma proteins and these plasma metabolites are actually somehow affecting the methylome and leaving marks on them.
why not it's a blood cell gene expression?
What?
Blood gene expression profile.
Why not blood gene expression profile? Because the blood gene expression profile is very dynamic as compared to DNA methylation. It changes a lot more quickly as opposed to DNA methylation. So again, each component in sort of our central dogma, right, has a different time scale, right? DNA methylation, for example, right, changes a lot more chronically as opposed to something like transcription, which changes a lot more acutely, right? Or even proteomics, which often changes very acutely in certain cases. Even metabolites it change very acutely. Some of them don't, some of them do, right? While on the other hand, the genome changes very chronically, right? Or in some cases, it doesn't change over your life at all, right? So each component of the central dogma has its own sort of timeline of change, so to speak. And some of them are better at predicting something, not others. Yes.
So are there any interesting companies that are adopting this technology and kind of giving you preventive medicine or the intervention to based on say organ based?
So not at the organ-based level yet. Only at the body using level that's happening right now. The other thing that's happening is, well, there are these longevity clinics that are doing it on an individual level. right? But again, we are not seeing it at like massive scale because these longevity clinics are super expensive, right? And so the cost is typically affordable, like the prices point is really favorable
Is
versus.
interventions typically expensive, or is it the research that?
It depends. I think intervention to intervention depends. Like something like metformin is super cheap. Even semaglutide and all is relatively cheap. Right? Even at like $1,000 a jab, it's cheap for for aging, right? Or for a certain consumer rate. But something like doing intramuscular plasma concentrate, right? Or plasma exchange, or the likes of like doing post-statin gene therapy, right? Which are like really things that are out there. Those are expensive. Those cost maybe $1 million. Right? Now that's something like the likes of Tanjong. Okay? And so those are things that are not to the general public. And I believe like those are technologies that are probably not going to be translatable long term, because like something like umbilical cord plasma extract, right? Which we talked about today. I don't think that's going to be translatable. What's going to be translatable out of that is probably going to be a protein or metabolite or some other factor that's driving that aging, right? That's an anti-aging effect, not the whole extract itself. Right?
Trend where there are interventions that actually give like have effect that plasma, or do you see trend where there's some formulated interventions being discovered?
Repeat your question here. So you're saying that are there trends that there are increase in aging in plasma?
Right, like so you mentioned how alternatively I could ask, so you're also principal in the venture capital firm.
Yeah.
What kind of industry trends do you see where startups, or how is the industry approaching this?
I see what you're saying. So there is a lot of sort of buzz in generally the aging field, right? But there's also been like a push and pull in terms of the fact that aging is both a successful business, but it's also a long-term business, right? So the bets are typically long-term, right? So I see aging therapeutics in three dimensions, right? One is that slow down aging, one that stop it, and one that reverses it. All the interventions that I'm talking about today are essentially right? They will perform slow down aging. Slow down aging. It will
बस 2 मिनट
it will prevent you from having cardiovascular disease at the age of 55, but you will still have a cardiovascular disease event at the age of 10. Right? So it's just slowing down, not working. Right? The next generation of interventions, I really believe that are going to be transformative are the ones that are going to reverse it. Right? Put on there yet. Right? I believe those are going to be something like epigenetic reprogramming. Right? So those are interventions, those are essentially that are going to reprogram altogether to reverse effectively the biology of the cells. So right now, if your biology of your cells is acting like that for 60 years old, it will take it back to being that right now. So what Brian Johnson says that I'm behaving like an 18-year-old, sure. You're behaving like an 18-year-old, but you're still gonna age, irrespective. There's no one that has stopped it, there's no one that has reversed it. That's not it. You live in Mumbai? I see, I see. I just talked to him on Twitter. He uses my biomarker, but I don't know. Uh, so essentially, epigenetic programming is always as partial reprogramming. You don't go back to like the stem cell like state. You go back to like a semi state almost, right? So you're not. So there are these things you might have heard about Yamanaka factors, which essentially de-differentiate your cells back to like the stem cell-like state, right? Back to putting them in what their original stem cell state was. So Yamanaka factors, you cannot put Yamanaka factors in your cell, right? They will essentially, if you put that, you will essentially cause cancer, right? Because after your cells become in the stem cell-like state, they actually become very cancerous, right? You don't want to do that, right? So what you mean is are these what we call as partial reprogramming factors, right? Somehow these factors become transcriptomic factors that can essentially take you back just slightly enough backwards, right? You don't want to go back, like if you think about the timeline of things, right? You don't want to go back to being a single cell conception in your mother's womb. You want to be just young enough to be 18, right? And that's about the right sort of sweet spot. And these transcriptomic factors can allow you to do that. But it's going to take us time to figure out which transcriptomic factors be the right one. And there are companies that are doing that. So there are clinical trials currently being run to show that they extend lifespan and stuff like that. And the issue is that even something like FDA doesn't have aging as a clinical endpoint, right? So what that means is that right now the endpoint for clinical trials is some disease, right? That you have to decrease the occurrence of some disease, right? But if aging is not considered a disease right now, right? How do you even say, right? It's decreasing aging, right? So the problem is that even though many of these interventions we know are potentially decreasing aging, we are seeing that, for example, metformin is decreasing cardiovascular disease, it's decreasing chronic kidney disease, it's decreasing yada 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 in different clinical trials, right? There's not been one clinical trial that shows that it's decreasing all of them, right? So we know from different trials that it's decreasing all of these things, right? So it's true for semaglutide, which is Ozempic. We have shown that it's decreasing Alzheimer's, it's decreasing inflammation in the body. Now it's being used for long COVID, so on and so forth, right? But there's not been one single trial, one unified trial to say it decreases aging, right? Because FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration of the US, doesn't allow it, nor does of the European Union, because they doesn't consider aging as a disease. I believe the drugs are already there. I believe our frameworks do not exist. The frameworks are not there to test them out. Unfortunately, the problem is not with our science, it's with the legalities of our framework. Right? Like, I'll give you an example. I take certain supplements and certain therapeutics which I believe are good for me. Right? Are good for my health and my longevity. Right? As someone who's sort of prone to metabolic and cardiovascular aging, being a South Asian, I will take certain therapeutics that are good for me. Right? But and I take them on the guise of saying that I am prone to these things, and so my doctor will give them. But no doctor will give them to me just because I want to say I want to slow down. That's it. Yes. That's correct. So the idea is that the methylation test is predictive of aging, right? So we first prove that they are predictive of aging, as we have done in all these large cohort studies. And once we have shown that they are predictive of aging, or we show them that they are surrogate biomarkers of aging, and then just use them in sort of these clinical trials, and then run a clinical trial to show that the biomarker is right, and that biomarker can decrease relatively, right? It doesn't have to have these large clinical. Sorry, if you guys have questions, I'm just like answering them. Just leave me to come here and ask. Sorry. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So what was the strategy?
I think psychological or medical lifestyle.
That's it.
So I think lifestyle changes are typically ones that you can sort of practice. So eating a Mediterranean diet or eating a low fat diet or a low carb diet or practicing exercise, practicing certain types of exercises, those are so I need to yeah, yeah, sounds good. Like okay. I was saying that they are all sort of lifestyle you can practice. Logical, on the other hand, is a different issue. They need to be, they are regulated and doctors typically ask them. Right. Need to have few reasons, right? I'll give you an example of why I started taking sort of certain therapeutics to go down to the quality. My dad has been, my dad had a cardiovascular disease and I had died. My mother had pre-diabetes. I went to my doctor and said like, hey, I'm on the scale of this, and then I did like because I was previously obese. I also had some bad depositions on my liver. I did a liver scan, and then I had bad depositions. They're like, hey, I'm on the risk of developing metabolic diseases and cardiovascular diseases. Give me oncological prevention. Okay. And that's how I started.
Sir, could we end up this screen? Sir?
Yeah, go ahead. And that's the way to get it at this point. But the point is that I can do that in the US while I was at Yale. It's a very progressive institute.